Hi folks, this is your next video on Sartre. We left off our characters of No Exit in stage 2 where they were just tormenting each other. In this video, I'm going to talk about what happens next and what the resolution to Sartre's play is. Basically, what the characters realize is this is the path of misery. And if they're going to have any hope here, if they're going to actually make any progress and avoid this kind of eternal torment, what they have to do is they have to really face up. They make it a better attempt at being honest with each other. So Garcin says, for example, so long as each of us hasn't made a clean breast of it, we're never going to get anywhere. We don't know anything. And that lack of understanding of each other is going to stand in our way. So if we could only be honest with each other and ourselves, then we will get somewhere. Now, they don't all have the same same degree of difficulty in doing this, but Garcin fesses up to how horrible a man he is in his treatment of his wife. And so his discussion about deserting the military, of course, he is condemned by that act too. But that's not all of why he's such a horrible person. Estelle really won't fess up to it. She keeps dodging their questions, and Garcin and Inez have to basically prod it out of her. But she finally fesses up that, she married a wealthy older man, but then, ran off and had lovers. She got pregnant and her suitor wanted to keep the child, but actually she kills the child and drives her suitor to suicide and crushes him. She dies from pneumonia soon afterwards, so she doesn't on Earth actually have to fess up to her actions in a way, but now she in a sense has to live with them eternally. And that's the way in which all these characters are haunted by their pasts in various ways. Okay, you can maybe see how this connects with Dostoevsky's themes of memory already. Inez is the one who has the easiest time admitting what a wicked person she is, in part because she is the person with the most insight, and she's the most self-aware. She's the kind of person, who has this self-scrutiny. She knows intimately. She is hard on herself, but she doesn't care. She's just a monstrous person, and she knows it. So her cousin, is going to have a happy marriage, but she insidiously, breaks up the marriage. Her cousin ends up dying, so he dies in questionable circumstances. Whether it was really he was driven to depression and it was suicide or not is not entirely resolved. But she, in a sense, admits that she's responsible for all three of their deaths. She is constantly wicked to her cousin's ex-wife or widow, and drives her to suicide, who kills the both of them by turning on the gas stove while they're sleeping. So all of them are horrible people, and they finally fess up to it. So what's interesting is you might think, okay, now we have the potential for making some progress. They might actually be able to save each other because they had a breakthrough moment. They're being honest with each other. Inez says, like, okay, is this going to work? Well, Mr. Gossin, you have us all in the nude. He was talking about this metaphor about how they have to strip down and make themselves naked to each other. And remember, this connects with the theme of being objects for others and the relation between individual and society. Because once we're down in the nude, of course, we are the most vulnerable we can be to the eyes of others and the judgmentalism of others. So she asks this really the critical question: do you understand anything better because of it? And he timidly says, well, maybe now we can start helping each other. He's going to make a go at it. And he recognizes, in a sense, this is their chance for some sort of salvation or to escape the torment that they have for each other. He has this nice thing about the cobweb. We are stitched together, socially speaking. Alone, none of us can save themselves. We are linked together inextricably. Now this is the critical moment of the play. It could go either way, maybe. It just depends on who's writing it, Sartre or Dostoevsky, because doesn't this sound just like Dostoevsky? Garcin even says, well, I can feel sorry for you. Look at me. We're naked through and through. I can see into your heart. Let's talk about the heart. This sounds straight out of the brothers Karamazov. Remember what Dostoevsky says: being isolated, the inability to be honest with each other or with society, that is the condition of hell. That is Ivan and Smerdyakov. That's the condition that the mysterious visitor is living in for most of his life until he finally meets Zosima and has his public confession. So it seems like we're actually making a Dostoevskian breakthrough. And several of the lines that Sartre gives us are deeply, I think, express how Sartre gets his predecessors. We saw Sartre, now we're living in this moment of existentialism has come of a certain age where it can reflect on itself. Sartre is the philosophy professor. He's read his Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and Heidegger and Kierkegaard. He knows all of the background. He knows how to express Dostoevsky's hopes quite well. He says, here's this line from Dostoevsky: if there are just two of you who could come together thusly, that is a whole world of living love. I mean, this is the Zosima, Alyosha, path of salvation that Alexei enables Grushenka and Dmitri to find. And Garcin says something so similar. If there's just someone, just one person out there who can acknowledge me, who can have faith in me, then I would be saved. And he turns plaintively to Estelle. If I could just snap my fingers, I don't need anybody else. You and I, if we could just bond in this Dostoevskian way, we could climb out of hell. And in a sense, he's right. Sartre sees the Dostoevskian solution, but he just doesn't buy it. So what happens next? Well, immediately after that line, like, you and I can get out of hell, Ine gives a shrill laugh. We've forgotten, wait a minute, it's not just Estelle and Garcon. There's the third person, the other, the woman who's a crowd unto herself, who really doesn't let them forget that they're living not in Dostoevsky's universe, but in Sartre's. Because, of course, these characters cannot find the kind of reconciliation they need. So this is the interesting way in which Sartre is so similar to Dostoevsky. You might read those lines about what could be salvation as Sartre agreeing with Dostoevsky how authenticity would be possible, how salvation would be possible, were we able to achieve it. What they disagree with is about the facts. We don't live in such a nice world. What if Dmitri never had Grushenka? What if she was not, what if she lived in a different town? What if it was just Katya? He would have just ended up tortured for the rest of his life. In a sense, Estelle represents to Garcin exactly what Katya represents to Dmitri. She is the person who just has the simple-minded, blinkered view of others. And she doesn't care about nobility. Remember Dmitri's noble side, that he understood what honor was, and he felt plagued because of it, because he realized he didn't live up to it. And Estelle, she doesn't give a hoot. She couldn't care about it. She just wants what she wants, acknowledgement by a man. And that means she can't possibly connect to Garcin in the way in which Grushenka and Dmitri have an open-eyed view of each other and connect in a deep way. So Garcin has to turn away from her, and his only hope for salvation is Ine. But of course, Ine just is plenty pleased with this situation and is more than happy to prod him. She said, they both know he has to convince her if she's the only chance for his sort of salvation, and this plight is hopeless. She says, okay, well, you're the one who's defined by your actions. Tell me what you did. Win me over in an argument if I'm the one that you have to convince. And he completely fails to do it because, in a sense, he knows that she's right, that he doesn't live up to his own ideals. And unfortunately, maybe Sartre is right. Maybe it's not true that we live up to our own ideals. So if we have these conceptions of what we want to be and the way in which our freedom could enable us to take responsibility for that, we're too weak to do so. So Ine simply reminds Garcin that he is defined by his decisions, and this destroys him. He's unable to actually justify his own existence to her. So this is, I think, we finally have a point where we can understand both Sartre's own positive view and how he compares with Dostoevsky. In many ways, they share so much. They realize how important society is to each other. But Dostoevsky takes the optimistic view and sees this as our chance at salvation. What other people represent, the possibility of other people, is really the commonality of the two of them. Our relationship to others is essential to our existential plight. But for Dostoevsky, it's the source of positive acknowledgement and the source of love and salvation. And for Sartre, of course, what other people mean is judgment and condemnation, complete embarrassment, the way in which we are to the eyes of others made objects and are no longer the pure subjects which we want to be. And that means for both of them, again, other people mean the opposite. For Dostoevsky, it's heaven, it's salvation, it's paradise. And for Sartre, of course, it's hell. And so the play ends with its most famous line, and it's pithily put, hell is other people. Now, you couldn't have a more anti-Dostoevskian summary than that. And what's so interesting about this rejection of Dostoevsky is Sartre shows us he understands the Dostoevskian point of view. He's just not buying it. That's what he's telling us here. So really, for Sartre, now in our class, we've sort of encountered a bit of a nihilist, somebody who rejects theistic conceptions and rejects the idea that we are going to necessarily be able to construct meaning in our lives, and instead thinks that we are more likely to fail at it. Now, let me say, I've said a bit about how, historically speaking, Sartre's role here is quite different. The fact that he's read all these other philosophers, for example. Another thing to realize is, of course, this is 1944. So you have to realize the historical circumstances in which they were living. Sartre, Nausea, his famous early novel, this is a really fantastic work. I highly recommend reading it. 1938, World War II was already raging in Europe at this time. His book of short stories from 1939 is really fantastic. So I highly recommend picking up either of those if you're interested. That's really fun fiction. Being in Nothingness is Sartre's magnum opus, his philosophical masterpiece. I don't recommend picking it up, actually. It is a tome, and it is partially, it is almost entirely impenetrable, and in my opinion, not nearly as good as some of his other pieces. If you do want to read some of his straight up philosophy, I recommend checking out Existentialism as a Humanism. It's much more intelligible than Being in Nothingness, in my opinion. And let me say, Sartre was drafted into the French army. He served. He was captured and spent time in a Nazi prison camp. And then later on, he got out. He was either released or escaped, and then was part of the resistance and was a major force for advocating social change in the good way, positive change, and fighting against the Nazis and anti-Semitism in France. And so it's not too surprising. Somebody who just escaped from a Nazi prison camp would not have a wildly Dostoevskian view that other people are naturally going to be sources of acknowledgement for us. He just witnessed firsthand that, people can be nasty. People are horrendous. And we only if we fight against that, it is going to take a lot of work to turn humanity around. So the kind of suffering that Yvonne goes on about in an abstract way, Sartre was living that firsthand. And partly, you have to really understand that and historical circumstances for thinking about his existentialist view. What's so fun about existentialism is that it's a necessarily historically conditioned, contextualized philosophy. And Kierkegaard got this from the get-go. Why existentialism for him is not necessarily the same as what it is for Dostoevsky or for Sartre or for us. And that is why you get to do some constructive philosophy, and you can figure out which of these philosophers speaks to you and speaks to the current historical circumstances. Now, let me finally return then to my location of Sartre. So Sartre is an arch-atheist and rejects all spiritual theism and religious meaning. He thinks we are stuck trying to construct meaning in our lives, and we do a pretty terrible job at it. So he is far over here on the natural side. I think it's tough to locate him on the individual and social. In a sense, that's because the social has two dimensions to it. It could be both positive and negative. He realizes the gamble that our need for socialization, our need for human connection offers us. Because in fact, that could be our salvation, as we saw whereas the way it works out in print in reality is often not that. So I put him somewhere in the middle here. I don't think he's radically individualistic, but I don't think he's up here seeing social meaning as the source of it either. In a sense, we need social meaning, but we usually don't get it, and so we're stuck here trying to construct some of our own, albeit poorly, and hence the kind of torment and anguish that we live in our everyday lives. We are all Abrahams, in a sense, is what Sartre is telling us. Okay, thanks.